All right, good morning. This is Dr. Bill Williams on the Influencers Podcast, and today I'm so thankful to have Traci DeForge be with us today, founder of Produce Your Podcast. And so, Traci, welcome, and I'm going to bring you on from the green room and have you be a part of our audience today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for asking.
Oh, it's so good to have a fellow Georgian. I think we already feel like we're part of the same team because we grew up in the same area of
Absolutely.
Atlanta, Georgia.
Yes, that was where I started my radio career and experienced a lot of really great professional and personal experiences in Georgia and University of Georgia alumni also. So it's great to connect with that Southern accent. I don't get to do it very often.
Yeah, you are out in the West Coast right now, I know. And well, what we want to know, our worldwide audience wants to know, what was your thing you were doing? What happened that led you to do what you're doing today, and what inspired you to be a podcaster?
Oh, well, and I'll try to make this a short story, which is a bit challenging for me. But the bottom line is, I spent 20 plus years in broadcast radio. It was truly the professional love of my life, if you will. And even starting as a small child, I was always fascinated with radio. And I used to sleep with an AM transmitter under my pillow listening to ghost stories when I was like really little. So I have just always loved radio. And I worked in broadcast radio for, like I said, 20 plus years. Then I started my own business, which was primarily focused on management transition and sales training for other radio stations. Long story short, fast forward, I ultimately ended up doing some business development consulting work for Fortune 500 companies. And about 7 years ago, I was working on a project with Weight Watchers International. And it really inspired me to want to actually write a book. But I'd been inspired to write a book a couple of other times, and it never happened because I'm better at talking than I am at typing. So I decided that I wanted to start my own podcast. And at that point in time, there were no full service podcast agencies out there. And I, because of my experience in broadcast radio, knew I really wanted a broadcast quality sounding show, but I also knew what it was going to take to get that produced. So I pulled a team together from the back from people that I had worked with. And we launched my very first of my flagship podcast in 2016. And right after that, I realized, oh my gosh, there's going to be a market for business owners like me who really want to have a podcast to represent their brand, but really don't want to necessarily do all of the legwork and the heavy lifting it takes to have a podcast like that. And so that's when Produce Your Podcast was born, which was in 2016. And we were one of the industry pioneers in virtual recording with live engineers. And it's just been an amazing adventure ever since.
Did you have any kind of a failure story that led you to do this?
I can't say I had a failure story that led me to do this, but I can say that when I was at the pinnacle of my broadcast radio career, which I was managing 12 stations, 3 different geographies, 100 plus people, and I did not personally take care of my own self. It was very demanding. I was really young at the time, early 30s for that level of a responsibility. And one of the reasons that was the catalyst for me to leave the radio stations and start my own business was actually twofold. One is because I couldn't rise any further up within that company because I was the next level was to ownership, which wasn't an option for me. And secondly, I was physically and spiritually and emotionally exhausted. And I was just consumed by everything that market manager job took out of me. And so I think if I had to put it in the context of failure, I would say I failed to really balance my life in a way that I could manage that level of stress and that level of responsibility with any semblance of a personal life that brought joy outside of my career. My career literally identified me, and it was all consuming.
I got you. Well, as we go into the lightning round, let's learn more about you and what motivates you internally.
I really love seeing other people succeed, and I'm inspired by having the platform to be able to create products that inspire other people. I think that's the biggest gift that Produce Your Podcast has given me, is that we are producing podcasts that make a difference in the world. We give people the opportunity to use their voice to change a conversation. And it's the most rewarding experience to be able to see that creatively come to life, but then also be able to see the impact that those podcasts make and ripple effect around the world.
Do you have a company motto?
Yes, our company motto is one voice can change a conversation and make a difference.
One voice. What
It
about
just takes one voice.
Your top 3 success secrets? What would you say they are?
My top 3 success secrets, I would say first and foremost is that you just have to show up. And by showing up, I mean, you have to show up for yourself, you have to show up for your team, you have to show up for your clients, you have to show up in the world, and then you have to follow up. And following up is really where a lot of people fall off. So, if you think about it, most people don't show up, maybe. And then the ones that show up, they don't necessarily always follow up. And so the real key too is terms of just following up, send that email, make that phone call, show up at those events and connect with other people, and then follow up with them. And then the third thing is follow through, because showing up and following up gets you the opportunity. But in order to be sustainable and scalable and grow, you have to be consistent on your follow through, and you have to absolutely walk the walk, talk the talk, do what you're going to say you're going to do, and do it well.
So what's the why? Why should somebody buy from Traci?
The why. Oh, wow. Well, I think that the why is really much more than just Traci. It's so much about our team. We are high touch point customer service focused. And we have really worked hard the last 7 years to build out, again, scalable and sustainable systems, but they're nothing without the team that's implementing them. And when our clients work with us, and we have clients that we've been producing for 5 years, 6 years, 3 years, so, and that level of loyalty to Produce Your Podcast is really based on our team and how they are servicing our clients on a daily basis.
Speaking of, who is that ideal client?
Well, golly, that Southern thing was really kicking in, wasn't it? Our ideal client is a business owner who wants to utilize their podcast to grow their business. We say that we focus on business-focused podcasters, but really that's a fancy way of saying that if you want to utilize your podcast to position yourself as a thought leader in your industry, to create a platform as a subject matter expert, or to use that as a lead generation tool or content creation tool to ultimately grow your business, then you're a perfect fit to work with us.
I got you. Who is that perfect client for you? You already alluded to it.
Right. Well, I think it's really, we don't have a vertically specific category. So we don't focus just on the healthcare industry or just on the finance industry. What we really focus on is our subject matter experts, people who really want to grow their business, but they want to do it in a way that's educating their clients and entertaining. Also, I always say a podcast should make you feel lighter and smarter after you have listened to it. And in that way, we do have really successful podcasters in every industry, from interior design to a global company that is a tech connect, life sciences leadership, radiology imagery, and everything in between. So I think that is probably our best differentiator, is that we customize every podcast that we create for our clients. We don't do anything that's formulaic or cookie cutter.
So basically, your well-defined product is a complete system to produce podcasts.
It is, and we do everything for our clients soup to nuts. But I think probably what really gave us the brand that we have in the space and the international recognition that we have in the space is that we were first to market with the opportunity for you to record remotely with a live engineer. So you could be the host located in Atlanta and you could have a guest anywhere in the world, and you can connect through a virtual studio and have a live engineer alongside you the entire time you're recording. And that ultimately leads to a better outcome of the quality of the product that you're creating.
I can see where that would make a huge difference compared to what's out there, people trying to do their own thing and having technical difficulties. It's a real opportunity then. I can see that. And that really is the answer to the question, how do you crush your competition?
Well, that's our first entry point on how we do it. And our second entry point on how we do it is we have systems and people in place to support you all along the way. One of the most important things about a podcast is the quality of the audio or video production. But the second most important piece is what you do with that piece of content after you record it. So we have a full service marketing machine on the back end. So once you record your podcast and it's edited, then we also create all of your marketing assets for you, because in order for the show to grow, it has to be put out there and people have to be able to discover it and engage with you. And what we say and encourage with all podcasters is, how are you continuing the conversation with your listeners or your watchers after they consume your content?
That sounds exactly like a 5-star client experience to me.
It is, and we are 100% focused on nothing but a 5+ star client experience. And we do that through really deep, immersive strategy sessions to build a show from the foundation, and all of the way from the ground up. We curate music beds, we curate voiceovers, we write all of the elements, get everything ready for you to launch. Then you have a launch specialist that works directly with you to make sure everything is launched properly, and a client manager that is always available to you and releases your episodes and works with you one-on-one throughout the entire time that you are a client of Produce Your Podcast.
And as a result, you convert your clients to brand ambassadors for more business.
We do, and I think that's probably the most fun thing for me to see as a business owner is when we have raving fans. Like I said, they may be really, really excited about working with me personally, but what I love is when I see them raving about their client manager or raving about their engineer. And we had a situation in Atlanta actually where our client Inside Design was asked to speak as a result of the success of their podcast. They were asked to speak at the Design Influencers Conference that was held in Atlanta last year about how they utilize podcasting so successfully in their business. And they invited our studio engineer, who has been with me since the very beginning of this process, Russ. He was actually on stage with them in Atlanta at the Design Influencers Conference. Wasn't me, it was him, because that, again, raving fans, and they are raving about our team, and I'm so proud of that.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to know you have specific examples of how you create this success. I have a question that's related to growth and building your business. Once you have a revenue generating idea, how do you convince your significant other to go along?
Oh my gosh, that has been I love that question because no one ever asks it. So my significant other had never listened to a podcast, didn't know what a podcast was, and really just was very concerned, I would say, when I decided to pivot from my Fortune 500 business development consulting practice to starting Produce Your Podcast. And I was just basically like, you just need to give me a chance on this, because, and we did have a lot of foresight because our entire team had broadcast radio experience. We really came to the podcasting industry with a different lens than maybe what you see now. There are a lot of people entering the space and they're doing a good job, but they're entering the space as a result of being a podcaster and then expanding outside of that. We came into the space as broadcast professionals, growing within the podcast industry with that lens. But it was not an easy, it was much easier to get our first client than it was to get him on board.
Wonderful advice. Hey, this is a question that a lot of people want to know. Have you used the paid digital media like the Facebooks and Googles and LinkedIn ads to play a role in your company growth?
Well, for the first 6 years that we were in business, our business was built primarily on referrals. And again, I'm really incredibly proud of that because that really speaks volumes for the quality of the work that we do. And in this past year, we expanded programs outside of full service production, and we didn't necessarily have a strong brand in that particular space. So when we launched My Podcast Biz, which is a podcast manager certification program based on the systems that we built out for our own Produce Your Podcast, we utilized Facebook ads, and we utilized that to drive traffic to a Facebook group in order to get people who might be interested in starting a business that was involved in the podcasting. Maybe they didn't want to start a podcast, but maybe they wanted to start to be a virtual assistant in the podcasting business. So we utilized it for that. We do use LinkedIn, but organically. And we do see for our clients that if there's an investment in LinkedIn, if that's their primary platform, or Google ads or Facebook ads, that they do have the opportunity to get conversions to their podcast in doing that. So we're advocates for it, but you just have to be really strategic. And I believe it has to come at the right time for your business growth. Otherwise, you could spend a lot of money and not see an ROI. So you really want to be careful and really work with somebody who understands the best way to create that strategy for you and execute on it for you.
So would you throw any particular one number out that's an average percentage that somebody should invest in that paid media?
I don't think I necessarily have a percentage, but I do have a ratio, and this is based on programs, consulting, and coaching that I've worked, coaches that I've worked with in the past, that basically that if you want to get a return on your investment, that you need to invest, like, let's say, for example, if you have to be aware that if you're going to spend $2,000 consistently, you may only get $1,000 in business back right away. And so you have to be prepared to not only spend enough for it to get a substantial return, but also over a period of time. So spending $2,000, getting $1,000 in business, reinvesting that, and then ultimately that will go up. But it's a long game. It's not a short game.
Absolutely. I think continuing advertising is the only way that ever works. What about your advice for that 20-year-old young lady named Traci DeForge? What would you tell her to do, knowing what you know now?
I think I would tell her that the word no is a complete sentence. And coming back to how we started this conversation in the South, a lot of times we feel like we can't just say no. We have to say no because bless their heart, I have to do this for them, and then I have to do this, and I have to, and you can't just say no. And healthy boundaries are incredibly important. And I think one of the reasons why we're so good at what we do is because I have really high people pleaser tendencies. And it's paid off professionally, but it's been a challenge for me personally. So I would tell Traci at 20 to be like, you could say no more often. It's okay.
That's because you're a Southern belle and you were raised to be polite.
Absolutely, but saying no actually can be more polite sometimes than you realize.
Tell us why being impactful is very important to you, Traci.
I think it's just at my core how I'm wired. I think we're all searching to make a difference in our own way. And I feel like that I've been able to discover a way that I can make impact as a ripple effect. The work that I do and engaging with people and helping them get their voice out there and their message out there has such a ripple effect. And then being able to tangibly see that ripple effect and see shifts happen and people's lives changed as a result, especially like health and wellness podcasts, things that are helping people get over barriers that they may not have had access to that information before. I think for me, it's when my head, my heart, and my gut line up, and I'm able to do the kind of work that gives me the luxury of having those three things happen. That's really the definition of success for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I coincide with that exactly. When you're said and done, you're looking back on your life, what do you want to be remembered for?
That's a tough question because I really didn't end up having children, which was an unfortunate sort of sad thing for me. So my legacy really tosses around in my mind a lot about, what do I want to be remembered for? And I think that at the end of the day, what I really, really want to be remembered for is kindness and compassion to others, and the willingness to do for others and help them along their way and lift them up, and do that either, through my work or through personal endeavors, but just to really be somebody that someone can rely on.
Absolutely. Well, how can we help support reach that goal? You tell us your website, your way to reach you, anything that you'd like that will help you move your company and your goals forward.
Well, and thank you for that. And I will say, I'll turn that around and say what's in it for you, as someone who is engaging this content, is that we do have an ebook that really is very resourceful. If anything we've talked about has resonated with you, you can go to produceyourpodcast.com and then /leverage. And by putting in the /leverage, you can download the ebook that is going to give you a tremendous amount of resources on launching and growing your business through podcasting. But produceyourpodcast.com will connect you with me in a minute.
Excellent. Well, I think I would say my experience of being the host of the podcast with you, Traci, is that you have opened the door for a lot of people to see the potential in their life for a podcast. Whereas sometimes they think it's daunting. You've taken away the fear because you're a done for you type of a company. And I think that really is powerful. Your USP is one that's as powerful as any I've heard. So thank you for that. And let me ask you the last question is, what would you say about your experience on our podcast, the Influencers Podcast, which you are, of course? What would you say about being on our show today?
Well, that's a tricky question because I'm pretty picky about podcasters and podcast management. So I would say that you get an A+ because you did an amazing job of being organized for me, sending reminders, sending information in advance, doing a pre-interview, which not all podcasters do. We were able to connect offline and meet each other first before the interview. I feel certain your post episode follow-up will be just as amazing as your pre-episode follow-up. So I say good job, A+. I'd be happy to be on your podcast anytime.
Hey, I take it, I accept it, and I hope that I can live up to those high acclamations. So thank you for that.
Well, you
Traci.
already have.
I want you to give us the final word. This is a professional podcaster giving us the final word on where we're going with podcast in the future.
Well, podcast is going forward rapidly. It is not going backwards. And I think the final word that I would like to say is that the market is not oversaturated. It's just beginning. So start where you are. If you're considering a podcast, don't be deterred by thinking there are already too many, because there's substantial room for growth all over, not only just in the US. Your voice and your message can be heard all over the world. And the medium is growing and growing, and it's becoming more accessible through technology and through connections like you and I are having right now. And it's also one of the most authentic ways that you can connect with another human being. There's a lot of talk right now around artificial intelligence and chat GPT, and those all serve a wonderful purpose, but absolutely nothing can replace the authenticity of a conversation that you have with another human being.
That one-on-one is never going to be replaced, that's for sure. Well, thank you, Traci DeForge, for being on the Influencers Podcast. All around the world, you have heard the source of the podcast industry, one of the founders of the podcast industry, speaking with us today on the Influencers Podcast. So we couldn't have chosen a more influential lady to be our guest. So thank you again, Traci.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely. And we will see all of you guys on the next Influencers Podcast. So stay tuned.